Sir, step away from the apparatus. I'm the fire chief. This is my station. Sure you are. Put your hands where I can see them. Slow down. You're outside a firehouse.
The station bay door was halfway up when the patrol car rolled in. Not fast, not with lights, just slow enough to make it feel intentional. Chief Darius Langford stood on the apron outside Station 14 with a travel mug in one hand and a clipboard in the other, watching his crew finish a morning rig check. The air smelled like diesel and wet concrete. A faint haze of exhaust drifted near the engine as someone blipped the throttle to test the response. It was 6:47 a.m., shift change time. The hour where the city is still yawning but emergencies don't wait for people to be fully awake. Darius had been in uniform since before sunrise. Pressed navy shirt, gold collar pins, his radio clipped high, chief's badge catching the early light when he turned his shoulder. He looked unmistakably like what he was, the chief of the department. The patrol car stopped at the curb. The officer got out, younger, square stance, hand already resting near his belt like he'd arrived for a threat, not a morning inspection. "Sir," the officer called, voice sharp across the apron, "step away from the apparatus." Darius blinked once, then he glanced behind him at the engine, at the crew, at the station sign that literally read, Station 14 in foot-high letters. He turned back. "I'm the fire chief," he said evenly. "This is my station." The officer didn't soften, didn't apologize, didn't even ask a clarifying question. He did something worse. He dismissed it. "Sure you are," the officer replied, and just like that, the line between misunderstanding and power move snapped. "Put your hands where I can see them," the officer ordered. Darius's crew froze. A firefighter halfway down the steps stopped mid-stride. A captain's eyes widened. The engine's diesel rumble suddenly sounded too loud, like the station itself was bracing. Darius held his mug away from his body, both palms open. "Officer," he said, calm but firm, "I'm going to ask you to slow down. You're outside a firehouse. You're pointing commands at the wrong person." The officer took one step closer. "Turn around," he said, and the body cameras, 2 from the firehouse security system and 1 from a firefighter's phone, captured the moment the city would later have to explain, because by the time the dust settled, the department didn't owe Chief Langford an apology. It owed him $1.5 million, and it owed the public an answer to the most uncomfortable question of all. How does a man become the chief and still get treated like he doesn't belong outside his own station? Rewind. Because the day didn't begin with confrontation. It began with routine. Darius Langford had the kind of career you put in recruitment brochures. 22 years in the fire service. Started as a probie who couldn't stop talking. Worked his way up through engine, truck, rescue. Earned every promotion with a mix of competence and the kind of calm that keeps people steady when everything else is chaos. He'd pulled people from wrecked cars. He'd carried kids out of smoke. He'd made the calls that haunt you and the calls that save you. He was also the department's first black fire chief, a fact the city celebrated on paper, press releases, photos, a handshake with the mayor. But on the ground, in the messy reality of institutions, celebration doesn't always translate into acceptance. Darius knew that. He'd lived it. He'd been the only black firefighter on a shift more times than he could count. He'd been tested, not with exams, with doubts, with the subtle pauses when people decided whether to trust him. He didn't respond with speeches. He responded with performance. He became undeniable. And when the city announced his appointment to chief, his mother cried on the phone. "Baby," she said, voice breaking, "you made it." Darius had smiled, but he'd also felt a quiet weight settle in his chest, because making it doesn't mean you stop being questioned. Sometimes it means you get questioned in more expensive ways. Station 14 was one of the busiest houses in the city. Older building, brick exterior, a bay that never stayed clean for long, a neighborhood that could swing from calm to crisis in 10 minutes. Darius visited the station often, not to micromanage, to stay connected, to remind crews that leadership wasn't a distant office. That morning, he'd come by to review readiness metrics and talk through a new response policy, a policy that had stirred tension between the fire department and the police department, because it changed how scenes were secured, who had authority, and, most importantly, how quickly fire units could enter. In the previous month, there had been a public fight, a police union statement accusing fire crews of overstepping, a fire union response accusing police of delaying life-saving care. The city framed it as interdepartmental coordination. On the street, it felt like turf, and turf makes people defensive, especially when they're used to being in charge. At 6:30 a.m., a call had gone out over the police radio. Not a fire call, a citizen complaint. Suspicious activity at Station 14, the caller said. Dispatch logged it. Caller claimed someone was near the apparatus, possibly tampering. Unknown male, doesn't look like staff. The caller didn't mention a uniform, didn't mention a badge, didn't mention the gold pins, just unknown male. In a certain kind of neighborhood, unknown male is a blank canvas, and blank canvases get painted with assumptions. Officer Mason Rourke responded. Rourke had been on the job 2 years, transferred into the district recently, hungry to prove himself, the kind of officer who took calls personally, like everyone was a test. Arrived and saw a tall black man near the engine, saw firefighters in the background, saw a station, and still, he chose the version of the story where the man didn't belong. That choice matters, because that's the first domino, not the cuffs, not the commands, the choice. When Rourke ordered Darius to step away, Darius didn't puff up, he didn't shout. He did what a chief does, he tried to stabilize the situation. "Officer," he said, "this is Station 14. I'm Chief Langford." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "You got ID?" he asked. Darius nodded. "It's in my wallet. I'm going to retrieve it." "Don't reach," Rourke snapped. That sentence, so small, so common, and yet it instantly turned a professional moment into a threat posture. Darius held still. "Okay," he said. "How would you like me to verify?" Rourke didn't answer. Instead, he raised his voice. "Turn around," he repeated. Now the crew moved. Captain Eleanor. Morales stepped down from the bay. "Officer," she called, firm. "That's our chief. Stand down." Rourke's head snapped toward her. "Ma'am, stay back," he barked. Morales didn't flinch. "This is a firehouse," she said. "He's in uniform. He's identified himself. What are you doing?" Rourke took a step as if he might direct his authority at her next, and in that moment, the station changed, not physically, emotionally, because firefighters have a different relationship to authority. They run toward danger. They don't like fear used as a weapon, and they don't like outsiders barking commands in their house. Darius lifted a hand, gentle, controlled. "Captain," he said, calm, "let me handle it." Morales hesitated, then she stepped back, but not far, close enough to witness, close enough to record, because she had already pulled her phone from her pocket, not as an insult, as insurance. Rourke's radio crackled. He pressed. "It. Need a supervisor at Station 14, he said, subject refusing commands. Darius heard it, the word subject, a word that drains humanity out of a person. He breathed in slowly. "Officer Rourke," he said, "I'm going to say this clearly. You're outside my station. I am the fire chief. You can call your supervisor, you can call dispatch, you can call the station phone. but you are not going to detain me based on a caller's assumption." Rourke's eyes flashed, and then, as if to prove he couldn't be challenged, he stepped behind Darius. "Hands behind your back," he said. The first cuff touched Darius's wrist. Cold metal, a shock of humiliation, and the station went silent. Even the engine's rumble seemed to fade, like someone turned the world down. Morales's voice rose. "Stop!" she shouted. "He's the chief!" Rourke snapped. "Back up!" And then, for the first time, Darius's calm wavered, not into anger, into something sharper. "Officer," he said, voice low, "you are making a mistake you can't undo." The supervisor arrived at 6:55. Sergeant Paul Denton, older, worn, the kind of sergeant who recognizes disaster from a block away. He stepped out of his cruiser, looked at the fire station, looked at the gathered firefighters, and then saw it. Darius Langford, in chief's uniform, with one cuff on. Denton's face shifted, not confusion, recognition, and something like dread. "What the hell is this?" Denton demanded. Rourke started talking fast. "Caller reported suspicious male near Apparatus," he said. "He claimed to be chief but refused to comply." Denton cut him off. "Refused?" Denton repeated. Then he looked directly at Darius. "Chief," Denton said. Just one word, but it broke the spell. Darius stared at him. "Sergeant," he said, steady again, "your officer is detaining me outside my station." Denton's jaw tightened. He turned to Rourke. "Remove the cuff," he said. Rourke hesitated. Denton's voice dropped. "Now!" Rourke fumbled with the key. Metal clicked. The cuff came off. Darius rubbed his wrist once, not for pain, for the symbolism, because the mark would be there. Red skin, a small line, a physical reminder of a moment that shouldn't exist. Denton exhaled. "Chief," he said, "I apologize." Darius didn't respond with comfort. He didn't make it easy. He simply said, "I want this documented, and I want your lieutenant here." Here's what people don't always understand. When something like this happens, the incident isn't over when the cuff comes off. It's over when the story is written, because someone will write a narrative. And narratives can erase humiliation. They can reframe misconduct as caution. They can turn "detained the fire chief" into verified identity. Darius knew that. So he spoke to the cameras, not the news cameras, the audio station cameras, the phones, the Bodycam. He said his name, his title, the time, the location. He stated that he had identified himself, that he had offered verification, that he had been touched with a cuff anyway. He built the record in real time, because records are how systems are forced to tell the truth. The lieutenant arrived, Lieutenant Andrea Shaw. She looked at Darius, then at Denton, then at Rourke. She didn't ask what happened first. She asked a better question. "Is there any lawful basis for detention?" Rourke started to answer. Shaw held up a hand. "No," she said. "I'm asking for facts, not feelings." Facts. The caller didn't see a crime. The station is clearly marked. The man was in uniform. He identified himself. Firefighters corroborated, and yet the detention occurred. Shaw looked at Rourke. "Officer," she said, "why didn't you verify through dispatch or station staff before escalating?" Rourke's mouth opened, closed. He looked for the answer that would make him look reasonable, but there wasn't one, because the real answer was too honest. He didn't believe him. By noon, the incident had moved up the chain. The police chief was informed. The fire commissioner was furious. The mayor's office called it a regrettable misunderstanding. But inside the fire department, no one used the word misunderstanding. They used a different word, disrespect, because when you cuff a chief outside his station, you're not just disrespecting him. You're disrespecting the institution. You're telling every firefighter in that bay, that their leadership can be dismissed, that their authority can be ignored, that a uniform doesn't matter if the person wearing it isn't the kind you expect. The footage leaked within days. It always does. A clip, 20 seconds. A cuff, a chief standing still, a captain yelling, a supervisor arriving and recognizing the chief. The internet did what it always does. It argued, it split. Some people said, officer safety. Others said, how can you miss a chief? But then the longer footage emerged, and the longer footage had a detail that changed everything. Rourke had walked past the station sign. He had looked directly at the chief's collar pins. He had been told by firefighters. He had a chance to verify, and he still chose cuffs. That isn't confusion. That is escalation. The lawsuit came next, not against the officer alone, against the department, because the argument wasn't only that Rourke acted wrongly, it was that the department's training and supervision allowed him to. It alleged unlawful detention, violation of civil rights, defamation, emotional distress, interference with employment, and it included something the city couldn't spin: the video, the audio. The moment Rourke said, subject refusing commands. The moment Denton arrived and said, Chief. That single word that proved the truth. Here's the twist that made the city's lawyers nervous. It wasn't the cuff, it was what came out in discovery. Emails, internal memos, prior complaints, not against Denton, against Rourke. A training note describing him as quick to escalate and overconfident in threat assessment. A supervisor note warning about command presence used as default, and most importantly, a note suggesting he struggled with authority recognition in non-traditional settings. In plain language, he had trouble adjusting when someone didn't fit his expectation of who was in charge. That note, on paper, turned an individual incident into a management failure, and management failures are expensive. While the case moved forward, the department tried quiet fixes. Rourke was reassigned, not fired, reassigned. Denton was instructed to review response protocols. The police chief issued a statement about enhanced training. But the fire department wasn't satisfied, because firefighters understood something. If your chief can be cuffed on your apron, any of you can be cuffed at a scene. And that risk isn't theoretical. It's operational. It delays response. It creates conflict. It costs lives. Darius spoke publicly once at a press conference outside Station 14. He stood in front of the bay doors with his crews behind him. Not as a victim, as a leader. He didn't attack the police. He didn't call for revenge. He said, "This is not about one officer. This is about procedures being replaced by assumptions." He paused. "When someone in uniform identifies themselves," he continued, "you verify. You don't punish. You don't escalate because compliance isn't immediate enough for your ego." His wrist was still faintly marked, a small red line, visible proof. Negotiations dragged. The city wanted quiet resolution. Darius wanted accountability and policy change. Because the money wasn't the point. The point was ensuring this couldn't happen again, especially not at scenes where seconds matter, especially not when command structures keep people alive. The settlement, $1.5 million, came with the usual language. No admission, no confession, but it came with commitments. Joint training between police and fire on incident command. Mandatory verification protocols for interagency encounters. Clear instructions. Do not detain identified emergency leadership without supervisory approval, absent immediate threat. Bodycam review audits on escalation language. And a formal apology entered into public record. Not perfect, but real enough to matter. After the settlement, Station 14 kept doing what it always did. Responding, training, eating cold dinners interrupted by tones. The city kept moving, Most people forgot, but the firefighters didn't, because they saw what happened when authority met assumption. They saw how quickly a chief can be reduced to subject. They saw how vital the record was, and they learned something the hard way. You can earn the highest rank in a department. You can carry decades of service. You can stand outside your own station, and still, in the wrong eyes, you can be treated like you don't belong. That's why this story isn't only about $1.5 million. It's about the moment before the number. A patrol car rolling slow. A young officer with a hard voice. A chief holding a mug. A station sign in plain sight. And a decision, quiet, fast, devastating, to believe a caller's suspicion over a person's identity. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. In emergencies, procedure saves lives. In policing, verification saves dignity. When either gets replaced by assumption, harm becomes a feature, not a fluke. And on a damp morning, outside Station 14, the cameras captured a feature the city couldn't afford to defend. So it paid $1.5 million. But the real cost was paid earlier, in a cuff, in a crew's silence, and in a chief's quiet realization that rank doesn't always protect you, not when someone's certainty decides you don't belong.